gun. Manning lets it fly. It's caught by Thomas. There's the record for Peyton Manning.
Saludos and salutations, Broncos country, and welcome to another exciting episode of Broncos Talk. I'm your host, Adan Diaz, and joining me, as always, to my right is at RichiRichEh. Richie, how you doing today, my friend?
Not bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Richie. Thank you very much. But, Richie, we've got a lot to talk about today on today's show. Unfortunately, things did not go the way that everybody in MHRT expected them to, and not just MHRT at that, Rich, everybody in Broncos country. So, got lots to talk about, folks. But before we start getting into the recap of the Raiders and Broncos game, just want to remind you guys that if you like what you're watching and listening to, whether you're watching us live or listening to us after the fact, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Click subscribe on YouTube to get live notifications whenever we go live. And as always, Broncos Talk goes live every single Tuesday at 7654. And we also have our flagship show, which is the MHRT Network show. It's the podcast with Mr. Boggins, myself, the boss, Mundungus, and, of course, Glenn Hauser. And you can catch that on every Thursday at 7654. And we also have the Nothing Rhymes with Orange and Blue with our good friends Johnny and Isaiah. That airs every single Friday at 7654. And then, of course, we have the pregame show, which is the Neigh-borhood, which features random cast members from MHRT as well as special guests that airs every single an hour or two before every single Broncos game, except for this week, which will have a very special episode since the Broncos play on Thursday. So, guys, make sure you click notifications, get live subscriptions so you know whenever we go live and you never miss a single minute of the show. So, Rich, with that being said, let's get into the recap. I mean, it's I don't think there's anybody in Broncos country that was able to watch that game and not swear or throw something at somebody, because I mean, it was just that bad. And I mean, for me personally, Rich, I had to watch the highlights again because, and even though it kind of was hoping that, it was for a different result, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And a lot of people in Broncos country are starting to call for Vic Fangio's job as well as Pat Shurmur's. And from what I saw in different pictures, there are people in the audience that day, in attendance, I should say, that actually had banners that said "Fire Pat Shurmur."
I saw that too. Maybe before we get into all of the stuff there, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today that is live here in the chat. Nice number of you on YouTube. Thank you very much. That is a platform we are really wanting to grow here at MHRT Network. So if you are new to the channel on YouTube, checking us out live or after the fact, we would greatly appreciate a subscription on YouTube. And if you'd like notification, there's that little bell you can tick as well. So we have a few people here. We have Ivan Diaz.
That's my cousin. Yeah.
I assume that's a relief. We have Mobad. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Matthew Olivio. That name is not as familiar to me. So Matthew, if you are new, thank you very much for joining us. And if you're not new and this is just a first time that maybe I've noticed you live, apologies, and thank you very much for joining us again. We have Avatar in the house. Thank you very much for joining us, Avatar. It's always a pleasure. We have Mr. Boggins and Dave Glassman that I've seen here as well. There is also from Facebook, Jerry Holland. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jerry. And if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask either myself or a 6'10" Mexican, please go ahead and fire those in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we possibly can. And with regards to your comments earlier about what is effectively what you probably watched, which most Broncos fans would refer to as the low light reel, it was hard to watch. It was rather painful because we all expected to see more out of our Denver Broncos. I think we all kind of saw what was happening in the last two games where we saw a bit of a slip in production and some kind of cracks in the foundation from what we saw from the previous three games. But I don't think anyone from Broncos country expected the performance, if you could call it that we saw on Sunday against the Raiders. I think we all expected more.
I mean, the thing that really bothers me, Rich, is how in the world does a Vic Fangio defense in its third year, where it's supposed to be elite, like it is on paper, when you read the names, as we've been reading all offseason, how does that not translate to the playing field? I can understand if we were in the same predicament where we were last year, where we had injuries, if they were nagging injuries. But that's not even, we can't even use that as an excuse because it hasn't happened. I mean, so far for the third straight week, the Broncos secondary has given up a big pass play, almost in the same opening drive, if I'm not mistaken. They did it against the Ravens, against Hollywood Brown. They did it with the Steelers with Chase Claypool, if I'm not mistaken. And then they did this one with Henry Ruggs as well. Now, I will try to give some credit to Darby because this is Darby's first game back. But at the same time, if you're healthy enough to go out there and play, you should be healthy enough to know who it is you're covering and who it is that you're dealing with, And it wasn't just Darby that got burned on that play, Rich. It was also, who was it? I think it was Kareem Jackson, who also tried to make a diving batted pass play, but unfortunately it got past both of them. So the defense, the secondary especially, needs to wake up because this is something that it's not tolerable. I don't even know what I almost said a bad word. It's just not right. And, it all starts with the defensive line. The defensive line, it was almost like they weren't even there. Derek Carr's jersey was a lot cleaner than Teddy Bridgewater's by the end of the day. And that is something that in Broncos country standards will not stand.
Was that a segue to Teddy being injured? Because I mean that was pretty seamless. So nice job there. I don't know if how many of you saw some of the pressers after the show. I sadly I actually watched them right after the game, so I mean it was pretty fresh seeing everything right after. And taking a look at how Teddy was walking, it was clear to me that he was in pretty legitimate pain. I mean, I don't know if you saw the rails on the way down from the stage, if you saw any of those replays, but he was using those as crutches. And I can only remember one or two other quarterbacks in all the years that I've watched the NFL who have been healthy enough to kind of walk on their own up to the podium to have to use the rails on the way down, just because of their injuries. And he happens to be one of them. And that was pretty sad to see, actually, in terms of, your starting quarterback having get hit that many times that he's limping down the stairs.
Yeah. And you know what, Rich, you and I talked about this before we went live just now. And it's something that I totally agree with that I heard on Broncos Country tonight. And that's the fact that even though Teddy Bridgewater did throw for 3 touchdowns, he also threw for 3 interceptions. And Bridgewater is supposed to be the veteran, the guy who's not supposed to be making those type of intercepting plays. That's the kind of play we were getting from Drew Lock. And, getting 3 and 3 out of Drew Lock was a bit of a, it's even. But the whole reason they gave Bridgewater the job was so he didn't make those kind of mistakes. He was supposed to play like he did against the Giants, like he did against the Jets, like he did against the Jaguars, that careful football play. And unfortunately, and also Bridgewater held the ball way too long, and he knows it. His offensive line knows it, and the offensive line was getting bullied and beat at the point of attack almost every single snap. So as much as it hurts me to see Bridgewater kind of limping and, just in other words, beat up, it kind of just in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, but he was kind of, he knows that holding the ball is dangerous. And not only did he throw 3 interceptions, Rich, but he also lost a fumble. So he had 4 turnovers on the day, and not even Drew Lock has had 4 turnovers, knock on wood, as a Broncos. So, and the Broncos just, again, trying to play from behind, trying to catch up, trying to play hero ball at the very end, at the end of the game. That's not who the Broncos are. The Broncos are supposed to be a team that when they lead, they hold the lead, they keep the lead. The defense is supposed to go out there and limit the damage that the opposing offense is trying to do. So until those things start to come to fruition, this team is in really, really big trouble going into Thursday night.
You hit a little bit on what I saw in the Raiders game too. There's a bunch of stuff, but both sides of the lines were weak in terms of what they were able to do. I also don't believe Pat Shurmur did us any favors at all in that game either. I was saying on our pod last week that I really thought that Shurmur, if he really wanted to get our team back into a rhythm and show that he was a capable offensive coordinator, I felt that he should have reverted back and gone more towards what he was doing in the preseason with the flanking tight ends. I didn't see a ton of that at all. And I also didn't see us attempt to run to the outside, leveraging those tight ends on the outside of the tackles to try and spread that interior rush of the Raiders. We were seeing the interior rush on the Raiders in particular just blast through the whole interior offensive line in the Denver Broncos. That was really rough and quite tough for me to watch, just because it was a bit of a way back playback from like 2 games ago where we saw the Ravens do that to us as well, where we looked pretty bad on the interior for the first game in a while. And we also saw a little bit of that happen to us in the first 3 games of the season. So you kind of thought we were past that a little bit, or at least to a point where you were more serviceable there. And we made no adjustments. We made no substitutions, and we didn't change how we were playing. And yet we were surprised. I wasn't once I saw what was on the field, but Shurmur was seemingly shocked and surprised that the result was the exact same.
Yeah, and let's get to some of the comments and questions we have here from our audience here, Rich. When we'll kick it off here with EJ saying Broncos need to upgrade players in key positions, and the coaching staff, we need players that are not soft and play like little sissy girls.
So can I just take that real
please.
quick? So I agree. However, EJ, if I can also jump in here, and I want to add a bit of a caveat to my comment saying, yes, I agree, because I was quite eager to say yay, but you need to know who you are first. And what I mean by that is, I think what we've seen so much of the Broncos do is they pick people that think will be good, but we're not picking them for a specific purpose or a specific look or identity. So when you look at the defensive side of the ball, Vic Fangio runs a specific style of defense. I happen to believe that there's a few people on the defensive line that don't necessarily fit Fangio's style particularly well. And I think that that's on our front office for picking those people to have on our team. Do I think some of those players can be really good, maybe in other teams? Yeah, in a different scheme. So you need to have the right people on your team to fit who you want to be. Do the Broncos want to be a passing team? Great. Well, then you need a specific style of offensive lineman that's good in pass protection, and maybe you can forego a little bit on the run blocking and hopefully develop that part of their game with the guy like Mike Munchak.
Yeah, and EJ also adds, we got embarrassed at home on our own field against a team without a head coach. And the reason I brought this comment up, Rich, is because this right here at the very end of the game, I think this to me is what probably pissed me off the most, is the fact that not only did the Broncos lose, but they lost to a team without a head coach, which is probably going to go down in NFL infamy for the Broncos for forever. So, I mean, if there was anything that I think Vic Fangio should have been pissed off about that fact, just as he was pissed off 2 weeks ago about the Ravens running a play instead of going for victory. That passion for that moment, that should have been replicated for that sentiment right there. He should have been angry at the press conference, and he should have been embarrassed, and he should have been just, because it shouldn't have happened. It really shouldn't, especially for a guy of Vic Fangio's caliber. And to me, I think the one thing that Vic Fangio has to do is he has to give up calling the defensive plays, because he's not up in the booth anymore. He doesn't have the bird's eye view that he used to have in previous years before he became a head coach. He needs to let Ed Donatil call the defense, because I believe that would be the first step in trying to fix this defense and bring it back to, just bring it back to being the great defense that we know it can be. But for some reason, it almost feels like everybody's playing in different coverages or in different positions that either they're not accustomed to, or that they're just, it's not the best of their ability, like kind of having Von Miller trying to cover wide receivers, stuff like that. And now that we're down 2 starting inside linebackers, Rich, that sentiment means more now than when we started back in week 1.
Some of the other decisions at the inside, you kind of brought in the inside linebacker, so I'll kind of bring that in first. When we lost Josey Jewell, he was having a really good season, and I'm not gonna lie, I was actually quite surprised at how good of a season he was having, because he looked rejuvenated. He had a extra, pep to his step, if you will, this particular season that he did not have in previous seasons, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I will be the first to admit that I was not a huge fan of Josey Jewell the past couple of years, because I felt that he was slow and he wasn't able to make up that speed or leverage his intellectual ability enough to make up for the lack of speed that he had. Whereas I saw him not only be quick, but also be sharper with his decision makings, and it really put him in really good spots on the field. So, I mean, I have to give credit where credit's due. He had some really good games for us. Unfortunately, he got hurt. And then Alexander Johnson got hurt the last game. You saw the play. I know that, watching the highlights, you probably saw it where he was kind of grabbing his pec on the side. He was stretched out to try and get the ball right near the sideline. I think it was Ruggs, actually. No, it was Kenyon Drake. Sorry, that was on the outside route there. Alexander Johnson stretched his arm out. You can see him kind of grabbing his pec there. But that was pretty early in the game, or early-ish in the game. So you do need to give some credit where credit's due, where he toughed that out and played the rest of the game injured. And I know that's a kind of a faux pas in today's NFL, but I have a lot of respect for a player that is willing to put himself on the line to try to better the team. And, it's unfortunate he got hurt, but we lost an inside linebacker who was clearly of, starting caliber last week, just before the game, to get picked up by the Titans, who actually just beat the Bills, which I'm shocked about. But they beat the Bills, and he could have been a potential person to fill in at that spot for us, to kind of have a bit of a. You'd have Kaiser, you'd then have Strnad, and then you'd have and I can't remember the guy's name now off the top of my head, but he was a starting caliber inside linebacker.
Yeah. Right now, the Broncos are in a position where they need to do something. And, George Paton is a name that we haven't really mentioned since the beginning of training camp, because, we were all excited. We were really happy with what he was able to do to bring together. Obviously not a lot of people were happy with the way he handled the whole thing with Philip Lindsay. But aside from that, we were all really ecstatic into, going into the season. So now he needs to do something where he needs to help that defense out, because as the Broncos can scout for inside linebackers, through waiver wires and whatnot. But I don't think that there's anybody, unless you trade for, that can be of the caliber that Jewell and Johnson provided these last few weeks. So if George Paton really wants to get this defense back in track and try to salvage this season, he might have to go and find a team to trade with, and it doesn't have to be something really huge per se, but it just has to be something where it's like, okay, we got a guy. Strnad is still, he's kind of teeter-totter at the moment. He's not the best inside linebacker, but he's not the worst either. And we just need to rebuild that depth at that position.
If we're able to beat the Browns this coming Thursday, which we're going to get into a little later on in the podcast here, then I think George Paton may be more inclined to do something like that. I do believe, though, if we lose this game this upcoming Thursday, that Paton will probably be less inclined to try to run out and sign a bunch of inside linebacker, or trade for an inside linebacker, simply because we might just have to suck this up with the season right now and roll with our rookies, see what they can do, see if they can improve, get an idea of where we're at. Because from a George Paton perspective, who you would think that, coming at the end of this year, Elway's in his contract year at the end of this year, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember, my math is correct on that one, it would stand to reason that Elway would be out the door. Paton would be on his own, given his contract situation. And this would be Peyton's time to evaluate our young players that we have on this roster to see if he needs to, to what degree he needs to make moves in the offseason, what this should be. Now, there was an interesting comment here that I would actually like to bring up, and I know it is going to come off as somewhat negative to some. I actually think it's just a sentiment that I've seen pretty much throughout both Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else. And I'd like to know everyone's thoughts on this. So, Ricky, thank you for joining us today, and I appreciate you commenting here. Ricky's comment is get rid of the coaches, and I've lost maybe 5 or 6 exclamation points just to drive the point home. But I think this is an interesting comment and sentiment, because this is really something that's been pretty prevalent across the board for Broncos country. I'm very curious of what everyone here thinks. If we were to make a coaching change, who do you think it should be, and who do you think would have the greatest impact? And do you think we should make a coaching change at all? Because I think those are some big questions at Broncos country. While there's been some infighting and kind of bickering back and forth, I haven't really seen that civil discussion to kind of get to a point where we can kind of all agree on something. So I'd be curious what everyone thinks.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm also going to quote something else that I heard also on Broncos country tonight, and that's basically that same sentiment, because if you fire the head coach, you're during the season, you're basically telling the team that that's pretty much it. That's, that's just the organization. That's just the team saying we're done. We're not going to go to the playoffs. We're not. It's just going to be whatever. Offensive coordinator position aside, that's different. So I think that with that idea in mind, I think that the Broncos are going to hold on to Vic Fangio till the end of the season. And then on Black Monday, he's going to probably more than likely be one of the first casualties to go out the door if the Broncos record is even worse than it was last year. But on the other hand, with Pat Shurmur, if Pat Shurmur doesn't win this Thursday and Vic Fangio's seat is already hot as it is, and it's going to get even hotter should the Broncos lose, he's going to have to either fire Shurmur, so, use him as the scapegoat, or he's going to realize it, or they're both going to go down with the ship at the end of the year and, try to keep Denver in a high, not super high, like single digit draft pick spot, but they could decide to give away a couple players, get some draft picks, rework some. I mean, it's still too early to tell, Rich, especially with an extra game this year, because the Broncos are not out of it. If the season ended today, folks, the Broncos would be the seventh seed wild card. So, let's just keep that in mind. It's still we're going into, week 7. So there's still plenty of football left to be played, but make no mistake, folks, it needs to the mistakes, the errors that we saw on not just on Sunday, but the last 2 weeks, they have to be fixed, because we are going to have to face this Raiders team again in about a month's time.
We have an entry here. I just want to quickly go through a couple comments, and I'm going to bring up the bottom one there that I'm sure you saw just come in there, 6'10".
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Boggins added a question of clarity to my previous kind of general comment to the group, and that is, was I suggesting the question to the group as being in season, like as of now or later, or after the season? And I was more directing my question for in the season or mid-season. And so I just wanted to kind of add that point of clarity. And thank you very much, Mr. Boggins, for taking the time to join us this evening. And that brings me on to the Raiders Daily Podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining the show. Always love having the opposing teams come in and join us and ask questions and interact. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Raiders Daily Podcast comes in. The Broncos have a good defense. They're overlooked the Raiders, in my opinion. So they overlooked the Raiders. I mean, I'm not sure we overlooked the Raiders, but I can certainly see how it may have looked that way on the field. They thought they were getting the Raiders that played the Bears. Hope you guys have a great day. Well, thank you very much for the civility. I appreciate it. I don't think we necessarily overlooked the Raiders. I just think that there were certain position groups that we didn't adjust to match the level of intensity that the Raiders have, particularly on the interior defensive line. that interior of the Raiders defense is legit. They really, really did show why they have done so well this year. Was it Max Crosby? I mean, he seemed to be high-fiving Teddy Bridgewater and sacking him, from time to time as well for most of the game. And, that really shows that there's some skill on that interior of the line there.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? To kind of play off that point from you, Raiders Daily Podcast, the reason that the Bears were able to make Derek Carr uncomfortable is because that interior defensive line. I mean, you had Robert Quinn, you had Khalil Mack, you had Goldman. Those guys were able to get to Derek Carr and make him uncomfortable in the pocket. And Carr is a pocket passer. You make him uncomfortable, you take away his ability to look down the field and throw the ball. The Bears secondary, while they might not be the best in the league, they were able to get the job done and keep the Raiders at bay. And that's something that the Broncos front D-line couldn't do. If you look back and watch that play, Derek Carr had almost 5, maybe a little bit more than that, seconds in the pocket to find a receiver and throw the ball. Whether it was Waller, whether it was Renfro, whether it was Ruggs, it really didn't matter. And towards the end of the game, you can almost tell that the Broncos defense, they in the red zone, they kind of just gave up. Like they weren't even trying. They knew Kenyon Drake. They knew that the running back was going to run the ball, and it didn't look like they were trying to try to stop the play and hold them to a field goal. So
100%.
Yeah. So that has got to change. And unfortunately, all the high hopes we had for Mike Purcell and Shelby Harris, and even Draymond Jones, they have not lived up to par, especially Shelby Harris, who got a nice big fat contract from George Payton. We haven't really heard his name a lot being said these past few weeks. So for him especially, that needs to change big time.
Justin Simmons has also seen a drop-off in his production compared to where he was last year. He had a lot more tackles and pass breakups and things like that as well. He also he had 4 interceptions, I think, last year. And so we're nearing kind of that first third of the season. So he should have, at this stage of the regular season, been between 1 and 1.5 to kind of match his stats from the year prior. You'd also hope from someone who's getting paid as the second or third highest safety to have shown maybe even another level within his game rather than an even or regression. So I think it's fair to make a general statement like that. If to answer my own question from previous, I was really hoping to get kind of an influx of folks here. Dave Glassman in with an answer to the question there, which I appreciate. Thank you very much, Dave. Yeah, so this is actually the most interesting one. This came up, I believe, our last show when we were kind of coming into the Raiders game, and it's come up a few times on some other podcasts as well, all Denver Broncos related. I think we've all pretty much come to the conclusion that Shurmur is at least a problem for our team. And so I'm of the opinion, slightly differing from what Boggan's comment was in the chat there, where he was indicating that he kind of felt that we should probably stay. I think if I read correctly, he thought we should probably stay but status quo, just because it was going to be, the person that came in was going to be calling the same plays. I actually agree with that comment. I think they will be calling a lot of the same plays. I really think they will. But what I think that they can also do is call them in the right order. And I think that they can also call them with better flow. And I also think that if we were to look at the end of this Thursday game, if we see more of the same stale and stagnant offense, we have a bit of an extended period of time where a new offensive coordinator who's, to Boggins' point, is simply just going to be a promoted coach on our own team.
Yeah.
Whether it be Dave Glassman's choice here of Shula. Shula, I believe, is the most natural choice given his past and history. The one guy that I really like is Zach Azzanni. I really think that he could be a great option for our team. Now, in my opinion, and this is mine and mine alone, and others may disagree, and I'd love to hear your comments, is if you go with a guy like Azzanni, you need to be extremely careful because the team really likes him. And other teams really like him, both at the NFL and the college level. So if you promote him, you need to be pretty sure that you think he's going to be probably your offensive coordinator, even for the next coach that you bring in. Because as a team, you don't want to lose someone who is clearly shown to be a quality coach. And you don't want to promote a guy to the interim OC and then try to have him come back as a wide receivers coach, because most likely that's just not going to happen. That's going to be seen as a step down.
Yeah. Travis Tarbox, thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
Travis, thank you for coming. Thank you.
He says, still not sure why we aren't running the ball much at all. And Travis, that's a very good point. And that's something that Rich and I also talked about before the show. And pretty much the Broncos kind of ran the ball in the first half, but because the Broncos were trying to play catch up, they had to get away from the run game, and that just forced Teddy Bridgewater to, heave the ball downfield. So when you have to throw the ball to try to get a touchdown instead of, running the ball and eating clock, that just kind of takes away. We didn't have any amazing plays from Javonte or Melvin Gordon this past Sunday. So it took away from them. So he had to take away from them to try to give to the wide receivers to, try to get ahead and catch up with the Raiders. But unfortunately, the Broncos offense couldn't do it, and the Broncos defense couldn't stop the Raiders offense, and it just went downhill from there. So it wasn't good.
I agree. And now just my kind of 2 cents on that is I think that we went away from the running game before we started turning the ball over. I saw us start to really move away from it as soon as that long shot there to it was either Drake or then the second one to Ruggs, where they hit on that long one that landed them eventually into the end zone. We were not that far behind. This is the second game in a row where Shurmur, I think, has kind of seen a long pass on the defense. And in my opinion, he's kind of looked at that, eyes bulging out of his head and saying, well, now I got to throw it all over the field. I think that some restraint from Shurmur is going to be needed in those circumstances and situations where he needs to stick with the run. And I think he also needs to start getting us running a little bit more to the outside and sealing the edges to try and mitigate the interior pass rush of these better interior defensive lines.
No, totally agree. So, guys, unfortunately, we're going to have to put this game behind us because, like I said, every team has a bad game. Unfortunately for the Broncos, they've had more than one per se, but this one was probably not the best. So Rich had to step out for a second. So gonna run things until he comes back. So guys, with that being said, let's get into the Mile Mountain. Basically, when Rich comes back, he'll give you his take on it. But I guess for me, probably the very top of the mountain for me would probably be Saubert. Because he did have that really, really good play on special teams. And that's something that we don't hardly say in Broncos country, that special teams made a fantastic play. And that's where he was able to recover the ball and give the Broncos the ball back and try to keep the game within reason. So for me, Eric Saubert is going to be the top of my mountain. Honorable mentions for that would probably be Noah Fant, only because offensively he played really good. He had a touchdown and he had almost 100 yards, if I'm not mistaken. Not exactly 100, but close. But unfortunately, the blocking for him, there was one play where he totally ran past the defender and just the defender went and caught Melvin Gordon behind the line. So the blocking and the recognition still needs a lot of work for him. And in terms of the summit, for me, at the very bottom, it would probably be the coaching staff once again. I mean, Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur and the defense, all three just put together, just building a village down there at the bottom of the freaking the mountain, because I mean it was bad, it was terrible. And probably honorable mention in terms of bad play would be the offensive line, not being able to open up running lanes and not being able to protect their quarterback to the best of their ability.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I have the interior offensive line. Actually, I just have the offensive line making up the general population there at base camp for that game. I was going to put Sutton up there. I had a few issues with, I felt that as a number one wideout, there was that one throw where he stretched out and it basically hit him in the hand. I know it's nitpicky. I kind of do expect a number one wide receiver to have that one, or at least run a cleaner route to get there. There was the second and the third one. That was not on Sutton. That was just a horrible throw by Teddy Bridgewater, and I'm certainly not putting that one on Sutton. But there was one where he stretched out and it actually hit him clear in the palm. I felt that Sutton should have had that one, as given the fact that he's an NFL wide receiver and he's looking to get that big paycheck at the end of the season, being on a contract year. So my summit, I actually had Caden Stearns again. I just felt that he played limited snaps, and most of those plays where I saw him on the field, he was making a play or doing something that you want to see out of a safety on the field there. I really think we just need to get him on the field a little bit more, especially as you see a combination of Jackson and Simmons both kind of having mediocre performances overall in certain plays. So I think it's going to be really good for our team to help develop a young guy like Stearns to step in if and when. I mean, we've already seen injuries occur in our team, so why not get a guy like that who's playing well, more playing time to get more and kind of prove more production?
No, and I totally agree. I'm sorry.
And then I have Javonte Williams on my ascent. The entirety of the offensive line in my base camp. I don't think any explanations are needed for either of those. And I have my plane ride home as Pat Shurmur. I just do not know how else to put it, more clearly, is the fact that, in my opinion, the easiest potential way for the Broncos to turn this season around for me is not to fire Fangio. He is a great defensive coordinator. I think he needs the right players on his defense in order to install his system. So if you want the number one way that I think that we can turn our season around this year as the Denver Broncos, I think is to start replacing the offensive coordinator after the Browns game, have another guy step in and start tweaking things. And then when we go into the bye, more changes can actually be installed and implemented that are maybe, that new offensive coordinator's own.
Yeah. I mean, it could happen, Rich, but there's a lot of good teams that we have to play before we get to the bye. We still have to play the Cowboys, I believe. Washington, I believe, is on that list, and I forget who the other. I think the other one's Philly. I'm not 100% sure.
So do you think Shurmur's offensive scheme is going to hold up against the Washington D-line or, even our other divisional opponents on their D-lines? Because I don't think it will, and I think a different offensive coordinator would help put our quarterback and our offensive linemen in better positions to at least better protect our quarterback. I mean, he's already gotten killed in the Raiders game. So that's kind of where I'm coming at from that perspective, is that we've already seen what Shurmur has. I don't disagree with you. It's not a great move. Great teams and good teams that have the right coaches on the rosters don't do that. The thing is, I don't think we have the right coach on our roster. So I think we need to do that.
No, and I totally agree. But, guys, unfortunately, it happened. The Broncos lost again to the Raiders, and as we start looking forward to the next upcoming matchup that Rich is going to lead us into, let's just remember that when we come back and face these guys in a couple of weeks, that we remember this moment and we go in with an even better idea and more passion and try to strive for a victory when we face the Raiders again in Las Vegas.
I agree. I just want to thank all the Raiders fans who came in and were making some comments and having some great productive conversations. We appreciate it. Anyone else from the Raiders, we'll have another podcast focused on them as our divisional opponent. You are always welcome here to start getting into robust conversations on the divisional battle that we have between the Raiders and the Broncos on an annual basis. And with that, guys, we are going to move into the Hot Five. This week is the Hot Five on the Browns. And here we go. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Hey, what's up? We're the Dawgs Podcast out of Dover, Ohio, Cleveland Browns podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Blake Reniker. Over here, we got Josh Hall. And right here, directly to my right, we have Justin Charles. Typically, we have a fourth guy, Zach Kopp. He got hung up at work today, so we couldn't get him in. But here are your 5 reasons why. Sorry, can we cut? Are we live? 5 reasons or 5 things the Browns need to do to beat the Broncos. I'm getting over Nailman.
Yeah, awesome intro, man. Okay, so number 1, we're going to start off with run the ball. going into this game, the Broncos look like they're very, very good against the run. If you look at them as a, statistical, I want to say they're 6th, 7th in the league against the run, but their first 3 games were against the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Jets, who, if you look at the stats, they're not good. No. Now, when they went against a real deal running back like Najee Harris, Baltimore, they gave up some yards. So depending on who we have as our running back on Thursday, obviously no Kareem Hunt.
Probably no Nick Chubb.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe a little bit of Dearness Whatnot Johnson.
But I guess we'll see. I think you got to get healthy on the line.
Yeah, no kidding. So, attack that really, really good, rush defense.
All right, well, then I'll just step in here with the second one. I'm going to go with the old, we need to communicate a little better on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the secondary. There is way too many wide open number 1 receivers for other teams getting free down the field on us and just getting wide open touchdowns against this supposed elite Brown secondary that has yet to be seen.
Yeah. The third thing we need to do is, obviously, this kind of goes for every team. We can't turn the ball over. We saw against the Cardinals 3 turnovers in their side of the field led to points for them every single time. Our defense isn't at a point right now where we can give them extra possessions, free possessions, great field position. We have to limit the turnovers, especially with the way we need to control the clock this game and run the ball. We can't afford to give away possessions because we might not get many of them.
Just to chime in on that too for you. So we gave the ball away a lot against the Cardinals. The Broncos had, I want to say, 3 turnovers against the Raiders.
Said he had 3 picks, yeah.
So, all right. Both teams coming in a little turnover prone. So the big one, another one for defense. Trust me, as I was sitting at the game yesterday, all I saw was us get loud, obnoxious, really rambunctious, shut down that offense, and then they would just get a first down every time. I probably stood up about, at least 15, 16 times, and that was the outcome every time. I'd love to see the defense, stop the run, get off the field, maintain good third downs. I feel like it's always 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, and if it is long, they just throw on us and get a first down anyway. Be nice to, contain those offenses.
The Browns are pretty good against the run the first few games of the year, but it was just that passing game that it didn't seem to matter what down and distance they were picking it up.
Yeah, so we got to get off the field on 3rd down. I think you said we were 22nd in the league in 3rd down efficiency right now. Teams are converting at a historic clip against us. It's terrible. And if they took 4th downs into consideration on that, we'd probably be even worse. Yep. And then lastly, Myles Garrett's got to take over this game. I think if you watched Sunday Night Football last night, you saw what happens when your best defensive player takes over a game. Strip sacks lead to wins. TJ Watt completely took over that game last night.
Chris Collinsworth made a comment something along the lines of, your best players make the best plays in the big situations.
Yep.
And I just thought, well, who is that for us?
It's got to be Myles. He
has to be.
The defense is coming in way more healthy than the offense in this game. He got $150 million in the offseason. He's got to live up to that contract. This is a game where he's got to put the team on his back and say, I'm not going to let us lose. I'm going to cause mayhem. So I'm looking for Myles to step up and have a big game. So that's the 5 reasons, as stated by the Dawgs Podcast, or 5 things the Browns need to do to be able to beat the Broncos. We'll see if we can do it. We're coming in really, really banged up. No excuses, though. This is the NFL. Next guy up. And I think we got some avenging to do from losses when I was 5 years old.
I completely agree. They took our Super Bowl from us, Denver. They took it. We had the drive and the fumble. Thank God I was only like a year old for that. I just lived through 20 years of no winning.
Yeah, I think we all 3 did, but it'd be really fun to watch the Browns Broncos Thursday Night Football.
Absolutely.
National stage. Blake will be there.
I'll also be there. Yep.
Time to get a win.
Yep.
You know what? As I was watching that, I was thinking the drive in my head, and it's like they read my mind. It was freaking crazy. But shout out to those guys. Thank you guys so much for giving us your hot 5 takes to the Dawgs Podcast. But they pretty much they pretty much put out some really good points out there, Rich.
They did.
And that's basically that they're probably one of the most beat up teams in the NFL right now in terms of injuries. And they have to really be careful who they set out there, because if somebody's injured and it's something that, as one of them stated, that it's the NFL, it's the next man up. But unfortunately, right now, every single team is not at a point where they want to risk trying to get a loss, because with every single loss a team accumulates, that knocks them further down the pecking order in terms of, even though we're not near the playoff standings yet, you don't feel it now, but you will feel it later on when those standings do start to take effect. So the Broncos need to take advantage of the fact that they're all beat up, and that Baker Mayfield might not be able to be a full go come Thursday, and that they're going to have to resort to playing Case Keenum, who, as a lot of people in Broncos country remember from 2017, was the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos.
I also think we need to remember that the two starting running backs, as far as I know, are both out. That should help our run defense, even though the Browns' offensive line is actually fairly good, and certainly within the upper tier of the NFL. And our quarterback, though, to kind of flip the script on that comment with regards to Baker Mayfield, our quarterback is also not in particularly spectacular shape now either going into this game. So I actually made a comment earlier today on Twitter saying that it might be an interesting time, or we might actually see three quarterbacks on the active roster for the Denver Broncos, depending on where Teddy's health is coming into this game versus the Cleveland Browns. Simply because if Teddy is not in great shape, or if he's barely getting on the field, a couple decent hits would probably knock him out of the game, unfortunately. And our offensive line had struggled against really good pass rushers in previous games as well. So we very well, or may well, need to have both Locke and our third stringer, who is infamous within the Denver Broncos fan base, in Brett Rippon, step in. Brett is actually fairly good at adjusting and making adjustments at the line and reading defenses, very similar to Teddy Bridgewater. So it'd be interesting to see who the coaches potentially put in if they have both of those guys active.
Yeah, and one of the things that the Broncos need to worry about is Myles Garrett. As the gentleman in the Hot Five mentioned, they paid Myles Garrett a lot of money, and he's pretty much disappeared since their game against the Bears, where they totally wrecked that offensive line and made Justin Fields' day a pretty bad one for that day. So the Broncos' offensive line, even if it means they have to double team a guy like Myles Garrett to keep Teddy Bridgewater standing upright and make a play, then that's what needs to happen. So they can't take that for granted, because, like they also said, the Browns' offensive side is the one that's more beat up than their defensive side. So this is a game where the Broncos' offense has to tiptoe and not force the ball down the field like they tried to do with the Raiders, especially if they have to try to play from behind. The Broncos' offense needs to make sure they have to get back to the running game first of all. Let Javonte and Melvin Gordon chew up some yards. Let them chew up clock. And even if we have to resort to Brandon McManus getting field goals, that's perfectly fine. But we cannot have another 4 turnover game where Bridgewater throws 3 interceptions, or Bridgewater fumbles, or anybody in the offensive side fumbles the ball and gives the Browns the ball back in and just makes our defense's job a lot harder for that drive.
I agree. We seem to have a quarterback suggestion coming in here from Dave Glassman. Does anyone know what Chad Kelly's up to these days? I think he's a vacuum salesman, actually.
I think he's playing for the Canadian Football League. He's playing for some other league. I saw his name in the news not too long ago, but he's not in the NFL. He's playing for some other football league. I think it's up in Canada, up in Richie's neck of the woods.
If I remember right, I actually think it's either him or I can't remember which other quarterback. It's one of them is up here with the Ticats, I think.
Manziel?
Yeah, that's who it was. Menzel. He's up at the Ticats.
Menzel. Sorry, not Manziel.
So Kelly is in the CFL. I'll be honest, I don't know which team, but I know Menzel was up here at the Ticats for at least a while. If he's not already, if he hasn't left already, I think he was with the Ticats. And CFL has a knack for trying to pull in names and whatnot from the NFL to attempt to bolster the league a little bit more and get a little bit more international recognition.
Yeah. So basically, the Broncos defense, especially if the one thing that Baker Mayfield has that works against him is his ego. A lot of people have seen his commercials, which I'll admit are funny, but at the same time, I don't feel that that Baker Mayfield has reached that status where he can make those type of commercials and still be called an elite quarterback. So that's one point that I've always agreed with Colin Cowherd on, is that his ego is higher than where his fame should be. If he'd have won a Super Bowl, totally different. Then all that stuff it's more like an added perk. But I have a feeling that Baker is going to go out there and he's going to try to prove a point, just like he tried to do against Arizona, where he should have. The right thing for him should have been, if he was really, really, really hurt, he should have stepped out and should have let Case Keenum try to rally that team to come back and try to beat the Cardinals. But unfortunately, and this goes for any single NFL player out there, when they try to play through an injury, 99% of the time, you're only going to make it worse. And like you stated earlier, Rich, kudos to Alexander Johnson for staying the whole game and playing through tough. But I'm pretty sure that because he did that, his torn pec got the injury got even worse, and then that led to
for
the
sure.
diagnosis.
There's no way you're playing an NFL football game with the torn pec and it's gotten better over the course of the game.
or it's like, we'll see you in 2-3 weeks type of thing. So unfortunately, it sucks that both of our inside linebackers fell to the very same exact injury almost a week or so apart. So guys, this is a game that we're going into. We can't take for granted. Just like we took for granted last week that we were going into against the Raiders just because it did have a head coach, that the team wasn't going to be able to have their head on straight and that they weren't going to be able to execute their offense correctly, as well as the defense.
Hey, don't lump me into that crowd. I was never in that group. I always felt I have a few folks that I touch base with, the Raiders podcast, and I've actually been at Raiders Daily podcast, and I have actually communicated a little bit on Twitter and whatnot. In my opinion, the Raiders tailspin week, if you will, was the Bears game. And that was the general consensus when you actually listened and spoke to some of the Raiders fans, as they felt that was the week that really hit the players in the locker room, because that really caught them off guard. And then against the Broncos, they had kind of had the entire week to digest it. And when Gruden resigned, it was more just the thing that they expected, I suppose. But all of the plays and stuff were implemented. They were running the same playbooks and that sort of thing. So I don't think the players were as impacted. I don't mean that they weren't impacted, but I don't think they were as impacted as the Denver media hoped they were and as fans hoped they were, because I think that happened the week before.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really interesting game here, Rich. And it could be where, the Browns and the Broncos are neck and neck for most of the game, depending on what condition Bridgewater goes in there and plays with. Both teams are beat up. Both offenses are struggling, as the guys in the Hot Five mentioned. But I do believe that the Browns have it worse than Denver does. And both of these teams, after the fact, are more than deserving of a mini bye week, because Lord knows that the Broncos could use some rest, especially since they have to go 3 more weeks against 3 different teams before they actually get their bye week. So
I agree.
So the defense, but going back to what we were saying earlier, Rich, the defense, they have to step up. They have to start making these plays. The interior defensive line has to play better. And I actually want to get to a comment that our good friend KB has stated for us. And he says, "What did you think of Von Miller's statement?
Thank you, KB.
I don't know who the tackle I'm going against is, but I'm going to kill him."
I saw that. That's been it's been converted into multiple graphical iterations of the comment already on the Twitter meme-averse, if you will, which is great. However, I like to see that fire, and I think it's really important for the team, or the team's most veteran leader who has won it all before, to start coming with that kind of fire, and trying to motivate the team. Most importantly, though, and there's been several players that have said this, but the most important thing about a player like Von Miller is you need him to actually. The Dawgs podcast said it pretty much best. Your best player on your team, for us, that is Von Miller. The best player on your team has to make big plays and big moments in key games. And after losing to the Raiders, if Von Miller can step up and make a few key plays and big moments against the Browns, he can be enough of a difference maker for us as the Denver Broncos, where we could have a legitimate shot at actually beating the Browns. And if Von Miller can, bring into reality the statement that he just made there, and really wreak havoc on the offensive tackle that he's going up against, it could happen.
Yeah. And you know what? This when he made that comment, Rich, it kind of reminded me of when he made that same comment 2-3 years ago when we were going up against Arizona.
Right.
And that to me is kind of like the sentiment that I believe he's just basically trying to, get the energy back up in Broncos country that got totally lost and deflated after that game on Sunday. So I don't blame him one bit. And I actually do hope we see that side of him, because, Von Miller was named the AFC Player of the Month last month. And then after that, it kind of just went a whole different direction. We haven't really heard his name at all for the last 3 games. So if there was anybody that needed to, kind of get that pick me up energy and like, hey, rally the defense or whatever, it's Von Miller. So I know right now he's playing without Bradley Chubb, and we can't state this enough. We sorely miss having Bradley Chubb out there on the defensive line, and just, being that just menace that Chubb is able to be when he's out there healthy. And it's pretty ironic that both Chubbs, Bradley Chubb and Nick Chubb, are not going to be in this game, seeing as how they're related. And this is probably would have been the first time out of I don't know how long it's going to be before the Browns and Broncos face each other again. Where
they played once, I think, before already together.
Oh, did they?
Or against each other once. Now, oddly enough, I think Bradley was hurt then, though.
Oh.
And I think Nick was healthy. Bradley was hurt. Now they're both hurt. So
yeah, except Nick Chubb, I believe at this point in time, is still questionable per se. I know Kareem Hunt is completely out. He's already been put on IR for the next 3 weeks. And it sucks me saying that, because I have him on my fantasy team. And he helped me win so many games these last few weeks. So for the next 3 weeks, I got to kind of steer the ship clear until he's able to come back. But anyways, I digress.
I had Leonard Fournette last week.
Ah, you lucky guy. Guys, as we start getting closer to the end of today's show, Rich and I just kind of want to go over our 5 points on what the Broncos have to do to beat the Browns. And that's basically limit the turnover battle. As the guys in the segment said, Bridgewater actually gave up 4 turnovers, and it wasn't just 3. They missed the one fumble he had. So they have to limit the turnovers. The Broncos defense, they have to play better. Von Miller, the interior defensive line, they have to make the quarterback uncomfortable in the pocket. Hopefully it is Baker Mayfield, because Baker Mayfield is going to be struggling out there. And if it is Case Keenum, then hell, it'll be Case Keenum. But whoever it is that's going to be calling the plays for the Browns, the defense have to get the turnovers. They have to get strip sacks. They have to force the ball, the quarterback to throw the ball, and they have to make plays. The offensive line, they have to play better. They have to protect, especially with Myles Garrett being on the opposing side. So if it's Teddy Bridgewater that's going to get the start, he has to stop holding the ball for so long. He has to go back to being the Bridgewater that we, fell in love with weeks 1 through 3. And he can't be out there trying to play hero ball, especially if he has to play catch up. And probably my last point is Pat Shurmur. He's got to go out there and play like his job is on the line, because I literally believe if the Broncos lose this game, that his job is he should be fired come Friday morning, if not sooner. So he has to go out there. He has to go back to being what the Broncos do best. We have to see what we have in Melvin Gordon. The Broncos are paying him $8 million, and so far he hasn't played like an $8 million running back. And Javonte Williams he's a breakout star, but he's not getting the time and he's not being handed the ball because Pat Shurmur's getting away from the run. So with those points in mind, guys, that's what I think the Broncos have to do to get a victory over the Browns.
So I'm going to be pretty quick here. Some of mine overlap with yours just because I think some of them are just so obvious that, they just are. Better offensive line blocking. I'm also throwing Fant into there. We've seen several plays over the last several games where key sacks have occurred on keying in on Fant, where he's either whiffed on blocks or not blocked at all. There's a GIF on Twitter that you can kind of see, or a video on Twitter where Fant just lets a guy, like he just runs past a guy, doesn't even chip him, and it actually ended up in a tackle for loss. Run the ball more and stick with it. I think the most important part of that is actually the and stick with it part. And I think that Shurmur just needs to kind of get out of his own head and he needs to just start running the ball. The opening drive. Yeah. The third one for me is our inside linebackers. Because we've lost both of our starting inside linebackers, those other inside linebackers on our roster need to step up and fill that void that's now being left by these starters that are now out. Jewell was already out. Johnson and Strnad were in. Well, now Johnson's out. So now we need all of these new guys to step up and fill that void. My fourth one here is the interior defensive line. We really need to start making these opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. While I know that it's not necessarily in Vic Fangio's system to get the extra penetration per se and actually get those sacks from the interior of the defensive line, you need to start collapsing that pocket and at least getting pressure on the quarterback to force them off that first read, even the second read, and then that'll allow your outside linebackers to get home and actually get those extra sacks, and also allow your secondary to get in position to bat down and get interceptions, because you're going to force the quarterback to make bad decisions. Last but not least, we need to start throwing a little bit more to our tight ends and running backs as quick, short, fast passes in order to get the ball out of our quarterback's hands. It's going to help with the pass rush. It's going to be an extension of our running game, which we, again, I said, desperately need. And hopefully it'll get us to a point where we can start negating the opposing team's pass rush, because we did struggle with that in both all of our losses. We struggled with that pass rush through the primarily the interior, although we also had edge rushers get around both of our tackles in several of these games as well.
Yeah, and the coaching, out of everything we said, guys, the number one thing that needs to get better and change is the coaching. Pat Shurmur has to do better calling the plays. Vic Fangio has to let Ed Donatel run the defense from up in the booth. I believe Ed Donatel can do it because he knows all of Vic Fangio's schemes. They've been together long enough. And I have a feeling that if he can let him run the defense, then that'll take a load off of Vic Fangio's mind, and Vic Fangio can just concentrate on being the head coach, and learning how to call timeouts when he needs to call his timeouts. So, guys, with that being said, we're going to start wrapping things up here. Rich and I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us in the chat. And if you're joining us after the fact, listening to us on audio, that's perfectly fine. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Rich and I would also like to thank the Dawgs podcast that came on and did the Hot 5 take. Thank you guys so much for your input.
Links in the description.
Yeah, so links are in the description. And guys, just want to reiterate that if you enjoyed today's show, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you get live notifications whenever we go live here on Broncos Talk with Rich and myself. And if you enjoyed what you hear, we got more shows. We also have the MHRT podcast, which airs every single Thursday at 7654 with myself, the boss Mundungus, who you saw make a small cameo here today, the Glenn Hauser, and the Mr. Boggins. And then, of course, on Fridays, we have the Nothing Rhymes with podcast with Johnny Bakke and Isaiah Henderson, two great guys. They always have the best Broncos news, the up-to-date Broncos news, I should say, to get us getting ready before every single game day. And then, of course, we also have the pregame show, which is the Neigh-borhood, that airs before every single Broncos game. Just keep in mind, guys, that this week, because the Broncos play on Thursday, There will be no neighborhood show, but there will be a very special MHRT show to get us ready and pumped for the Thursday night game against the Browns. So with that, Rich, let's get ready to do the everybody's favorite part of the show, the Ma High Five. For those of you that don't know, the Ma High Five, you hold out your hands, you yell out Ma High Five, and you clap them over your head. It's that simple. So, Rich, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Oh, here we go, guys. Ma High Five! Woo! Guys, thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you all next week. Hasta luego.
Go Broncos.